'Tis I, your old pal, King Chuck. I'm at the park again. I tried to do this podcast yesterday while I was at the dentist. My father was in for a cleaning, and he got out early, and I couldn't finish it. I tried to do everything without editing or stopping or whatever. But I'm at the park right now. Of course, I switched parks recently. Now I'm at a more human-friendly park. My dog does not like other dogs, and too many times she would follow other dogs and stuff like that. So I want to share with you a little story. So way back about 16, 17 years ago, I was working second shift at my job, and we were in dire need of a helper. And this was just after the economic breakdown of 2008, and nobody was really hiring, and this older woman walked in our shop. I was walking through our shop with our boss, and our boss introduced me to her. She looked like she was 80 years old. She had gray hair, poofy gray hair, permanent frown on her face. I felt very instantly uncomfortable around her. And we all knew the reason why our boss hired her. It was not because we needed a helper. He needed what we would call the second shift snitch. Our boss would go home every day about 5 o'clock, and what would happen is after 5 o'clock it was our freedom, because we all talk smack about our boss and how he wasn't giving us a fair wage, and he didn't give us a wage increase of any kind for years. Instead of wage increases, he would make us watch Dave Ramsey videos, or he would give us a Meyer card if he felt our numbers were all right. And not only that, he would maybe give us a slice of pizza at the end of the month, and that was it. He was not about us. And it's like every time we had a meeting, all we heard was me. And I mean, years ago there was a guy who did tell him after one of his long ass meetings, "Hey, you keep talking about this, and this. When are we going to start getting raises here?" He reluctantly said, "Come to my office, we'll talk about it." Well, a lot of people did, and they got the same answer. You weren't doing enough. You don't do enough. You don't do this. You don't do that. He always focused on the bad of people, so that way he could, he would go on all these stupid trips every so often. And here we are in Grand Rapids. I was deciding how to buy groceries this week. And people were making fun of me for living in a crappy apartment. Then again, it was, some of these people all voted for the people who got me in this dead-end position, of course, especially people like Reagan and the two Bushes. And I didn't like it. So this old lady, she was, basically, so my boss had a plan. Hire this woman, be a helper, and she was slow, and she was not easy to work with. But here's what happened. She learned about our troubles in the long run. She learned that we were only human. And she put herself in our position. So the story was, she worked at this company in Grand Rapids for almost 40 years, just a year or two shy of 40. This company was in downtown Grand Rapids originally. Then the factory burnt down. She originally worked on one of the machines. And then when the factory burnt down, she she changed her, and they rebuilt, and they built a new facility in Cascade. She ended up becoming forklift certified, and she drove her forklift for a living, drove the old high-low around the plant. And then what happened was she ended up so anyway, the factory kept adding on. They had a it was grandfathered multiple times, support arches and support beams everywhere, and she crashed into one of them one day, backed into one of them. And so what happened was they whisked her away into the office, and they told her flat out, you're not safe anymore on the high-low. So what we're going to do is we're going to find you a new position. So she was laid off for, 1 month became 2 months, 2 months became 3 months, and then 6 months later, she got a thing in the mail. It was her ESOP check. The company she worked for had what you would call an employee stock ownership plan. ESOP, of course, that means that she, even though she was fired from her company, she was an owner, even though they fired her. Well, so anyway, I've seen, and the sad thing, so anyway, this company ended up going out of business. As a matter of fact, they hired somebody who bankrupted the company, and now it's not an ESOP anymore. And it's like, that's probably one of the very few things that Michael Moore talked about in his movies. He praised ESOPs, meaning that employees got to own the company. But I've seen so many of them fail. And like Carter's Market in northern Michigan. Carter's Food Center was a giant supermarket chain. And this company failed because they hired somebody who was giving away jobs for free. And that's not how the business runs. It's not like a grocery store where, you just bought an expired can of soup. We'll give you another one for free, and hopefully it's much better. I mean, that doesn't work that way. Anyway. So now she was working for our company, and she hated it. She was only making a fraction of what she was making at her old company. I think she was getting paid about the same wage I was at the time. And, like I said, we kind of hated her and loved her at the same time. But anyway, what happened was she ended up... So, in 2022, our boss announced that everybody on second shift was moving to first. I would still be on as a helper, but now I would have a few helpers with me. And as for the woman, she would be on as a shop expediter. She would be back on a high-low going around the plant. And if anybody needed stock, she would grab the high-low, give it to them. I mean, she would help our shipping guy. Well, our boss was actually on vacation at the time. As a matter of fact, our supervisors actually were told while he was on vacation, I think he was in Louisiana, one of his stupid fishing trips. Yeah, he spent a lot of money on these lavish vacations. So this is what happened. He ended up... So this asshole had his henchmen tell us what the new plans were. And as the week went on, this woman told me that she talked to her mother about it. And the mother said, this is a sucker position. You're going to be back on the machine in no time. Well, I was off that next week. We were, all the big changes happened. I was in Detroit with my father. My father was living in Kentucky at the time. He came up for the Woodward cruise. So I spent a week with him and my uncle. So I came back to work that next Monday and talk about chaos. Yes, she was right. The boss put her back on the old machine, hated it. And, two of the helpers that were supposed to be on the machine, they all quit. So now they were hiring temps. They were hiring people who, didn't know how to count. I mean, they were just there for a paycheck. And if things went wrong, I was the one that got yelled at. Not the helpers, none of the temps, me. Because I was expected to do more for less money. So this is what happened. As the weeks went by, I learned that the new helpers that he hired were actually getting paid more than I was. And get this, I actually was now making less money than I was when I first started, due to the fact that I lost my shift premium. And I was counting on the shift premium to help me survive financially, because I was now way behind on everything thanks to my boss. And, the new helpers, they were just standing around doing nothing. And my boss expected me to go around and tell them what to do. And it's like, I'm not their boss. Why would they listen to me? That's his job. That's how he micromanaged everything. He was a manipulator. He was a gaslighter. He was the biggest asshole. And what happened was there was even a temp black guy there who decided to tell me. And he told me, come. Yeah, my dog is snooping around the bathrooms. That's probably not a good thing. So what happened was, this temp was telling me, hey man, I'm guessing, how long have you been there? And I'm like, I've been here for like 10 years. Oh, so you might probably get $20 an hour, man. And I went, no. Oh, come on, Chuck. 22. Every fucking minute, he asked me how much money I was making. And yeah, he even tried to get me to go to his church. His uncle was a preacher. I actually went to their website. And it turns out that this church even had a show on TBN. And I'm like, oh, fuck. I even tried to tell him, I want nothing to do with TBN because they're crooks. I even tried to talk to him about the scandal that was going on with, what was it? Kara Crouch. Yeah, the 13, yeah, she was the 13-year-old granddaughter of Paul and Jan Crouch. She was raped by a TBN employee in a hotel room. And the TBN tried their damnedest to bring it under the rug. And I said, these are the most evil fuckers in the history of mankind. And he was like, and he gave me some speech about, we try to talk to people about help women with rape and blah, blah, blah. I don't give a fuck. Keep your religion and your bullshit away from me. It's like this guy was trying to get me to scream at him about, it's like you don't discuss, folks, I can't believe that money would become such an issue at this company. It was like, it angered me. Yeah, my biggest fear was that I would finally tell him that I wasn't even making $10 an hour, and yet he would probably go to the boss and say, and talk, yeah, he would. I mean, I've learned that there's so many backstabbers out there. Anyway, but I had to remind myself I was not getting it worse. This old lady was. She wanted to show our boss that she was a hard worker. And after hearing all the horror stories of our company, she gave up. And finally, she stood in front of. So this is what happened. She, and not only that, it was like we were supposed to work 10 hours a day. Well, our new helpers would go home at 3 o'clock, but we had to stay an extra hour because, well, there was a lot of handwork to do. And we were the ones that did it because we were now the lowest paid workers in the whole plant. So, finally, theatrically, I should have stood up to my boss, but I did not. And the reason being was because she did. So this woman, one day while she was doing handwork, while I was at the binder at my machine, she came to me. So the story was, one day while I was at my machine doing my work, she came to me. And one of my boss's henchmen, well, it was a woman actually. My boss was what was funny was that my boss was ultra conservative. He was a hunter, meat eater, and one of his henchmen was a woman. And the funny story with this woman was that she was a lanky little vegetarian who was only about 5 foot tall. Yeah. And here's the story. This woman came to me and said, "Chuck, give me a firm handshake. Nice knowing you." And I said, "Are you quitting?" "I just got fired." So she got fired. And I would learn, so anyway, the official reason was that she had a bad attitude. But the real reason was she got fired because she allegedly went to the boss and finally stood up to him and said, "You don't care about us, don't you?" And it was the truth. And we all learned a lesson. And that lesson has always been, even if the boss is wrong. She's friendly, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Even if the boss is wrong, they're always right. Because they're the ones who built the business. They're the ones who own it. And somehow along the way, they're the reason why they're successful. But here's the story about my boss. My boss but you see, my boss did not own 100% of the business. Although he was the president of the company, he co-founded it with a father and son. And they, all three, the father and him worked together at a big religious publisher here in Grand Rapids. And in the 80s, they discontinued publishing and they started to outsource. So what happened was all three of them came together, pooled their resources together and started this company. Now, the father and son treated everybody with love and care and respect. Although the son had his own business and he was totally focused on that. But this guy, he was a peon and a spoiled brat. You know, he came into the he was in the business since he was fresh off high school, and even when he worked for the big book publisher, he wasn't a good guy. He was, he didn't know where the hole in his ass was. So this is what happened. You know, the long story short was the father treated everybody with love and respect. And when he retired, he, sadly the the presidency of the company went to this guy. And he didn't build the business. He was just a peon. And sadly, and it showed. And how he showed it was telling us that instead of conventional raises, you're going to get a Meijer gift card if I feel like it. And, there were some family people who worked at our shop who didn't even live close to a Meijer. I mean, the closest grocery store to them was a little shit shack Spartan store, for all I know. The point was, this is not how you treat an employee. When I grew up, I learned if you work hard, if you do shit right, you'll get money, you'll get raises. Show up to work on time, do your job right. That's how you get raises. But my boss, his system was, if you work hard, he gets all the money. But you see, folks, long story short, my boss, so the story was the son and the boss got together and said, look, man, your numbers are in the shitter. Your finances are in the shitter. We've had 10 straight quarters of losses. I've heard horror stories about how you treat your employees. And look, you're 60 years old. It's time for you to retire. So the story was the son had to pay off the father. I guess he was in debt to him. So he was just waiting for the day to get his dad paid off so he could buy the rest of the business from this guy. And he did. And, it was such a happy day when he retired. I mean, I was having, the story was this guy threw me into the shitter. I had panic attacks. I was miserable. I hated my job. I hated my life. I tried to find other jobs. And guess what happened in the end? We ended up. So this is what happened. My boss was bought out. So the story was my boss was bought out, and the new boss took over. And about 8 months later, I came to him and finally said, "Do you give out raises?" And a day later, I had my first raise in 10 years. And since then, I've had multiple $1 raises. Multiple. And, some years I had 2 raises. But since then, I haven't had a raise. I mean, since, in the last 3 years or so, I haven't had a raise. My theory is because of Trump, unfortunately. And the uncertainty and the fact that, his terrorists have really fucked up a lot of stuff. And, and our company is over tariffed as it was. But you see, that's the way it is sometimes. That is the unfortunate reason why. Come. Yeah, my dog's eating something. Yeah, I hope it wasn't toxic. So that was the way it was. I ended up happy that my boss retired. And oh yeah, one of the best stories I heard about, last I heard from my boss, and this was about 10 years ago. He was down in Florida. He stepped on, and get this, while he was working on a boat, he stepped on rebar and it impaled his foot. Oh man. So I always love that story, and it shows, you know, folks, come. She's picking on somebody's car. Oh man. So what happened to my dog? My dog. So you see, folks, the reason why I tell you this story is because I think of Scott Pelley. I have been thinking about Scott Pelley this past week and what happened with 60 Minutes, what's been going on with that show. And we all know the story. Scott Pelley got fired from 60 Minutes because two of the show's anchors were fired this past week, including Alfonsi. You know, she was the one who did that SeaTac story and you know, the jail in South America. And yeah, she got fired because of the controversy surrounding it. And the sad story is, you know, Scott Pelley is a man of high integrity and excellence in broadcasting. And yet CBS is pulling the same shit by hiring nobodies to handle the news. Come. I wish my dog was not trying to drag me into danger. We're in the parking lot and there's a lot of cars here at this park. So Sharon Alfonsi was fired, and so was Cecilia Vega. She was an anchor on 60 Minutes, and now Scott Pelley. And now the three remaining anchors on that show, they're worried. They're very worried. And they're very upset that this show has, you know, gone down the tubes, all because several years ago they did a story. You know, they interviewed, of course, we all know what happened. They interviewed Kamala Harris, and they cried that the interview was against Trump. Trump sued for $16 million, and instead, you know, this was definitely a light, you know, a frivolous lawsuit. They should have CBS simply should have fought Trump in court and won, but nope, they gave him that money. Of course, CBS was in the process of being bought out by Skydance, and we all knew what Skydance did to make Trump happy. They fired Stephen Colbert. They dicked around with 60 Minutes. They hired Barry Weiss to help, you know, turn CBS from a channel with integrity to a channel of lie. Basically, they're turning it into Fox News Junior Light right now. It's turned into regime media. And, you know, I've seen it happen too many fucking times. And now, of course, the family that just bought CBS, you know, they're trying to buy Warner Brothers and pull the same shit with CNN. They want to turn CNN into more regime media. And at the end of the day, what's going to happen is the only reliable news source left on TV is going to be MS Now. And of course, MS Now, what used to be owned by Comcast, they used to be MSNBC, but now they got spun off recently. And yeah, brand new media company, and I guess, you know, thankfully they're still a very, you know, they are liberal leaning, but the point is, folks, is that I don't want to hear that they're going to survive all this. Look at what happened here in Grand Rapids. Look at what happened to Citadel Broadcasting. Come. Yeah, she's Yeah, there was a guy who looked like he wanted to park, and my dog, what, I don't know what, it's like there's lush green grass and trees everywhere, and my dog wants to hang out in the parking lot. Oh, she is such a weird dog. Yeah, getting me and herself into trouble. Anyway, no. Jeez. Anyway, so what happened was, come. So, long story short, look at what happened. I told you the story with KLQ and Citadel Broadcasting and Matt Hanlon. Look at what they did. I mean, he thought that he did the right thing by fucking over Howard Stern and, basically turning KLQ into a corporate rock format. And look at what happened in the end. He bankrupted the company. He thought that any morning show that KLQ would have better ratings than starting on WBBL. Of course, BBL was a really crappy station. And we all knew the rest of the story. Starting on BBL had better ratings. Ron and Don flopped, and so did all these other wannabe hacks. And the long story short was that Citadel went bankrupt. Matt Hanlon helped to bankrupt the company. He went to Town Square. He helped to bankrupt, he went to Town Square here in Grand Rapids. He tried to pull the same shit with GRD. And, of course, he only worked in advertising, thankfully. But guess what? His road to the top, his, proposed re-rise to the top, of course, guess what happened? He got caught drunk driving. He got T-boned by an elderly couple, damn near killed them. So guess what? He knew that he fucked up, and, and so many people. I remembered when he started really putting his claws into KLQ. People were talking smack about him. And yeah, he actually fired a few folks. And I finally remembered one of the guys was Bill Walters. He fired him not once, but twice, actually. He was at KLQ. Got fired for talking smack about Hanlon and trashing him on stage, and people cheered. And then he got fired. Then he went to Z93, which is also owned by Citadel, was owned by Citadel. And he came back to Grand Rapids. He actually wore a shirt that I made for him that said, Ron and Don suck. And people actually cheered. Because it was a station event, and then Hanlon learned about it, and he got fired from Z93. Now, of course, he doesn't work in radio anymore. I would imagine he's probably retired by now. I think he's in his 60s, actually. Yeah, Bill, I thought Bill was much younger, actually. I thought he was, at the time, he was actually in his 40s when he was at KLQ. I remembered that. But anyway, he doesn't even use the name Bill Walters anymore. Yeah, it's Bill Sepla. And we used to be friends on Facebook, but he dumped me a few years ago. Because, I guess he's really trying to distance himself from the past. But, oh well. He was a bit of a character back in the day. But anyway. You see, what happened was, we've all had bad bosses. And I know that you're not supposed to talk smack about your boss, because, if you get fired and you stand up for standing up to your boss, then guess what? Your next boss isn't going to feel bad about you at all, because you are now a risk. And and I've had to keep my mouth shut for many, many years about the people, some of my former bosses. And of course, so last weekend I went up to Northern Michigan. I went to see my my great aunt passed away. I was kind of hoping not to go to her wake. I was kind of hoping my dad would stay the night there and I could stay home and take care of my dog, but it wasn't meant to be. My dad really wanted me to go with him. And it was kind of a good idea because, he had back surgery last year and he can't, he couldn't drive for a very long time. So what happened was I had to do all the driving for him. Well, some of it. I did most of the driving. He did. I did do some of the driving. But anyway, one of the things that did happen when I was at the wake was my former boss was there. I had a former boss who I worked with in high school and sadly, this woman, so this is what happened. She made me work with a pedophile when I was 16, 17 years old washing dishes. And for years and years, I felt terrible having to work with this asshole. And, and if you really want to know what he looked like, you just go to the Michigan sex registry. And there's a picture of him. His name is Ronald Henry, and he lives in Elk Rapids, Michigan. Ronald Henry, back in the 80s, was accused of performing oral sex on a 6-year-old boy that he was babysitting. And, the mother came home early and saw that he was, going down on this little boy. And she called the cops, and he denied it. And, there was just not enough evidence at the time. So what happened next was, so he was a risk for a lot of people, and people knew that Ron was a bit on the odd side. He looked like he was mentally disabled, acted like it too, looks like it. Ron, he did a lot of really sick shit when he worked with me, and one of the things that he did was I was washing dish. If he told Ron to do anything, he couldn't do it. He didn't want to do it. And anyway, what happened was one time I was washing plates. I was at the plate and bowl station. He was at the glass station, glass and pans and stuff like that. And so the story was I had to change the water in my sink. It was dirty and filthy, greasy. I mean, come on, it was a Mexican restaurant. I put new water in, and as I was filling up my sink, this asshole comes to me, right behind me, with a spatula loaded with sour cream, and he sprays it all over me. And I screamed at him, "Get back to your station." "Oh, your sprayer is stronger than mine." I don't care. Yeah, I think he was really trying to cop a feel. He actually did it to me twice. And we were getting backed up as a result. I wanted to punch his lights out. But anyway, the long story short was that Ron and I worked together for 2 years, and then he quit because he went to another restaurant. He went to another restaurant in town, one that was actually by him, the Ames Street Cafe, actually. So what happened next was that Ron... So anyway, Ron was fine after I had gone my separate ways and moved to Grand Rapids. Ron, about a year or two after I moved away, Ron went to jail. So this is what happened to Ron. He lured a 11-year-old boy into his house, and he grabbed the boy's crotch and said, "Do I make you hard?" Yeah. He was a sick man. And quite frankly, I can't believe my boss made me work with him. And you know what? I tried my best for years and years to be nice to her. I mean, I would come back and she would always give me a big fat hug and give me a meal. But The restaurant closed 7 years ago, just before COVID. She was burned out, and the restaurant, it wasn't as profitable as it once was. And I think what really truly happened was the restaurant was getting bad Yelp reviews, and people were saying that it just wasn't as good as it once was, and you can just taste the burnout. But I think too that what was really going on as well was people in town knew that this woman didn't mind making children work with sex offenders. She didn't put in, and part of it too was that her son was 23 years old when he started dating one of the bus girls, and she was like 15, 16 years old. And they got married, and now they have a kid together. And I'm like, that's the problem with Northern Michigan. They accept pedophilia. And not only that, one of the people who also attended the wake was my dad's cousin's wife's sister. And she was very excited to see me. She was happy to see me. And unfortunately, I didn't want to really talk to her. And I'll tell you why. It's because her son is somewhat well known in Northern Michigan. And he was good pals with one of the biggest assholes in Northern Michigan radio history, Tom Devitt. I mean, this was he made fun. Tom was bashing me on social media. Tom was, he also got Smitty fired from Rock 105 and 95.5 because at the time he was on KLT, and Tom was ripping everything that, and Tom was ripping off everything that Smitty was doing, like Tom's sack, and yeah, really. And I remembered, at the time, of course, Jerry Coyne was trying to buy the station. Jerry Coyne, of course, owns Q100 in Grayling. And I had to a lot of times I have to remind myself, Jerry Coyne, Jerry had me call him, and basically he covered his ass and told me that, well, my wife is a member of the Michigan Lottery, and she's on the council, and we don't allow this stuff. We don't support radio stations that do this, and blah, 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 blah. And I have to remind myself who the Coynes are very good friends with, and that's Ted Nugent. Jerry was actually a guest on Ted's TV show recently on this ultra right-wing conservative TV network called Real America's Voice. And the story was, you got to remember, all these people are Epstein class. They don't care about the safety of children. Period. Full stop. It's like the only people I can think of in Northern, and it's like, speaking of Ted Nugent, I have to remind myself that Ted Nugent, not Ted Nugent, yeah, when Ted Nugent was at the National Church, he made a very special appearance during the Night Ranger concert. Of course, one of the members of Night Ranger and Ted were both in the band called Damn Yankees back in the 90s. And they had that big hit song, High Enough. You might remember that one. And the story was that when Ted appeared out of nowhere to come on stage, the whole crowd cheered. This guy ruined the lives of multiple underage girls. And Courtney Love even admitted that when she was like 14 years old, she gave Ted oral sex. It's like, what the Fuck, dude. And yet, the good news is you look at Interlochen, and I applaud them over the fact that they. Hello. And how you doing? And so, Interlochen did the right thing. You know, for years and years, Epstein was a supporter of Interlochen. He went to school there in '67 when he was a little boy. He was a big funder of Interlochen for many, many years. And then when the sex charges came and all that, they did the right thing and announced that they were going to demolish a cabin that he built there. And I'm like, good. Give people a lesson that you know, pedophilia should never be allowed. Period. Full stop. And, you know, and not only that, you know, yeah, I see that some people mentioned me on one of the old message boards I used to post on many years ago, and they started trashing me. And yeah, I mean, yeah, one person even said that at least I'm consistent, that because I'm still talking about the same shit that I was talking about 20 years ago. And I'm like, dude, yes, I'm sorry to say it, but nothing has changed except things have only gotten worse. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. And it's all because of Trump. Anyway, speaking of radio, I was going to give, yeah, I need to give. So what happened was, hi. So what happened was my dad and I, after we went to the wake, we drove up to the old house in Torch Lake, and it's amazing how our neighborhood has really changed. It's amazing, you know, when my mom and dad bought my childhood home, it was really small and, you know, just this tiny little modular, you know, just 3 beds, bathroom and a half, no garage. And all the houses in our block of the street were all modulars too. And it was the only place my dad could afford, basically, because, you know, my mom and dad were still in their 20s. They were starting out in life. And so the story was, you know, so trying to make a long story short, my mom and dad, of course, they broke, you know, my mom and dad, you know, my dad was a bus driver. My mom worked as a secretary. And, oh, yes, somebody brought their dog along with them. So what happened was my mom and dad, so the story was my mom and dad divorced. Well, first of all, I was going to say this. My mom originally worked as a secretary at a machine shop in Elk Rapids, and my dad was a bus driver. And that's enough. And, you know, they did okay. Of course, my mom lost her job, and she had to work several different jobs, and then they divorced. She worked at a gas station for a while. So what happened was my dad was able to keep the house. I mean, he made enough money to stay there, and even a bus driver salary. So what happened was my mom and dad So the story with my mother was that they ended up, my mother ended up getting another place, and for a while she and I were staying at my mom's friend's house, and my mom's friend was this ugly, morbidly obese piece of shit human being who was a slut, and she kept jacking up her rates because she had to, my mom's rent, because she was buying lingerie and pretending that she was sexy, and quite frankly, she wasn't. So what happened was,
good morning.
My mother had to find another place, and the law basically a part of the divorce decree was that my mom had to stay in the school district. She had to stay in Elk Rapids. So she ended up getting the only place she could really afford in the area. And it was on the border of the district. And, because Elk Rapids at the time was too expensive to live. I wanted her to stay in Elk Rapids, but she wouldn't let me. So now I had to, beg her to take me to movies. I had to beg her to get me things. And my dad was also the same way. They were always saying no and do something else. I mean, that's what happens when you live way out in the middle of nowhere. And and it's like I never liked the rural life myself, because all the kids at school were into this, that, and everything else, and I did not have anything, because my dad was a bus driver making very little money, and if I wore like a Simpsons t-shirt to school, and you had to have cable to watch The Simpsons back then, kids would come to me and say, "Oh, what happened on The Simpsons last night?" And I'm like, "I don't know." "Oh, you're a poser. You're not a real fan." Yeah, well, I was a fan, but it was like, okay, dude, you're bullying me for, to me, bullying somebody for something like that is like making fun of somebody who, a woman who lost her boobs to cancer. Yeah, it's like telling a breast cancer victim, "Well, you don't have boobs anymore, so you must be a dude." Yeah. Sorry, but not sorry. Making fun of people who, don't have access to stuff shows how fucking idiotic you are. Yeah. Yeah, I have a story about one of my bullies. It's for a different time. But, the sad story. So anyway, I was getting back to my story. So the story was my mom and dad so the story was my dad, anyway, long story short, my mom and dad divorced when I was 12 years old. My dad kept the house. My mom eventually found another house. Then she got remarried. And then I lived with my dad full time. And then what happened was my dad moved to Kentucky with his new wife after I graduated high school. And then what happened was, after my dad moved to Kentucky, my mom moved to Arizona with her husband. So what happened was my mom and dad moved away. I moved to Grand Rapids. And so I would still make trips up to northern Michigan, and I decided to visit the old neighborhood and see how much has changed. And I stopped at the old house one day, and I met the couple that bought the house. And what happened was they told me, "We're having a hard time finding work up here." I mean, it was the 2000s. It was a really tough time for everybody. And what happened was, I read a short time later that the house was foreclosed on. And so was the house next door to us, which was actually owned by my dad's cousin. And the reason why that house got foreclosed on was due to the fact that so the woman who bought the house, she was a bit of a weirdo. And unfortunately, her dog attacked our dog. Our dog eventually died from the attack. Her son got busted for drunk driving. He spent some time in jail. He lived with her, and he was pretty much dead weight. So I guess the story was she was trying real hard to keep the house, and she was fighting the courts. And what happened next was she lost the house to foreclosure. So this was a house that was 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It was it was a good sized home, but sold for like $102,000 in court, in bankruptcy court or whatever. Because the courts owned it. The bank owned it, or somebody, whoever. And what's even more depressing about my old neighborhood, so we drove around all the houses, which used to be all modulars and stuff like that. Now, the houses are very beautiful. They've been, a lot of the houses now have a second story. Good. All the houses have a second story now. It's like they've really updated. But then but here's the story. Here's what really makes me sad about my neighborhood. The only people I know who live in my neighborhood after all these years are the Bishops, and they're our other biatch of the day. I've talked about the Bishops multiple times. Trucker Randy in Victoria. They actually live just blocks from where I grew up. They live on Wood Special Drive off of Barnes Road in the Torch Lake region. So the story with the Bishop family is that Trucker Randy, who is the husband, he owned a business. I guess the story was he owned a business, and he got busted for tax reasons, and I think he went to jail for a little bit, so now he's a convicted felon for being a tax dodger. And then after that, after he served his time or whatever, he and his wife moved to northern Michigan, starting life anew. Of course, what's funny is Victoria is 80 years old and Randy is like 67. So this guy married a old lady. Long story short, Randy became the head of the local Republican Party, and he caused a lot of trouble. Not a lot of people liked him, and so he convinced Victoria to buy him a radio station. She actually bought him a few stations. They actually started up what is now Mac FM 106.3 up in Onaway, which is now it's it was, and then they traded it with Del Reynolds for 94.5 in Mackinac City and 93.9 in Mayo. They ended up getting rid of 93.9. They sold it to the Seventh-day Adventists, the Strong Tower Radio people. And the stations originally had the call sign WYPV, we're your patriot voice. And they aired this ultra right-wing idiot talk radio format. They even aired Alex Jones on their stations. Alex Jones, I can't believe Alex Jones actually hates Trump. He's actually seen the light after all the damage that he did to lose InfoWars. And then on top of that, So anyway, so this trucker Randy guy now has WCHY 97.7 in Sheboygan. And he's continued his morning radio show called Your Defending Fathers. Even though the station, their main station, is not in Sheboygan, but rather in Torch Lake, way out of the station's broadcasting range. 97.7 has a pathetic signal, by the way. And, of course, not only that, you got 97.5 up Kalkaska, WKLT. And, so anyway, so Trucker Randy, he's an election denier. He's a he's MAGA, hardcore MAGA, and he's a racist. He actually went on his show one day and slammed any white person who is married to a person of color. And John DeMoose, who himself is a MAGA Republican, who is a state representative serving that area of Michigan, even slammed him for doing that. And not only that, I see that, because, his wife is a woman of color. And then, on top of that, Trucker Randy, so another story with Trucker Randy is the unfortunate fact that he's pretty much in bed with the Chatfield family. I even heard a commercial on WCHY from a guy who was turned on to Jesus because he went to the Chatfield family's church and I think it's Onaway or Sheboygan or wherever it is. Yeah, the Chatfields are ultra conservative. Lee Chatfield is, I believe the father's name is Rusty, and then the son's name is Lee, and he was the former Michigan House Speaker who got caught bringing a gun to the airport. Yeah, the Chatfields are pathetic. Yeah, they even aired this commercial on their station that basically said that I found Jesus at this church and I learned I'm going to be going to heaven because they did a series on 1 Corinthians chapter 6. So basically, that verse in the Bible is where that chapter is where Jesus tells a bunch of people who's not going to heaven. And I would imagine that they are an anti-gay church, and their version of the Bible says that God hates gays and members of the LGBTQ people. And it's like I heard another sermon on that same subject, and the truth is, there's it's all translated from the Greek, and the truth is, it's a word that people can't translate. And they just, in some versions of the Bible, they say that wicked are the homosexuals or whatever. And the reason being is because, in other verses of the Bible, and like the Old Testament, it says no man should sleep with another man. And, the Bible, the Bible has long been a book designed to tell people, basically trash everybody who's not a man in white. That's what it is. And then on top of that, these Chatfields, I'll tell you something. They're the type of people that if Jesus walked into their own church today, they'd kick him out because he's a Mideasterner. Plain and simple. So, anyway, the reason I'm giving them Bee-otches of the day is because last week it was discovered that, so the story was Victoria Bishop is now she was elected the treasurer or secretary or whatever of Antrim County. And she got busted because her husband, Trucker Randy, who, like I said, is a convicted felon, was using a government computer that had all the voting records on it. And according to trucker Randy, he said, well, I was on this computer because I had an important meeting and I couldn't be there physically. And it's like, okay, go to a different computer then. You're a felon, dude. You should not have access to this shit. And not only that, there was another issue at hand. So Antrim County was the epicenter of one of the biggest scandals in history. And that was the fact that Donald Trump thought he won the 2020 election. So the story was the local treasurer of Antrim County, or whatever her role was, she, unfortunately, when she was getting the numbers for so when she was getting the numbers from the election in 2020, this is what happened. She went to the wrong page of the computer. She went to a demo page, and it said that Biden won 75% of the vote, and that's what she reported to the media. But that's what didn't happen. She went to the wrong page, and that's how things really got fucked up. So what happened was, this is why Donald Trump and Fox News this is why Fox News started telling the facts. They decided to tell everyone, oh, this Dominion company they hate Donald Trump. Oh, they're a pro-Biden company. And of course, we all know the rest of the story. It was, these deniers were sick people who believed that Trump won in 2020, when in fact he was running this country in very far into the shitter. And Biden won fair and square. And the only reason why Trump won was because he manipulated people. He told people that everything would be more cheaper, and instead he gave a black eye to the party, his own people. And on top of that, now even people who are not well educated hate Donald Trump. Even people who are uneducated, the people who are not the smartest people in the world, they hate Trump. So now, this trucker Randy guy, he's probably still a Trumper. He's still doing his little radio show from his house every day. And what's sad was this woman who, Victoria Bishop is a very vile woman. And it's amazing that even the Democrats supported the former Secretary of Antrim County. So now the Secretary of State of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, she's investigating the bishops into possible wrongdoing. And I agree. The bishops are sick people, and I'm ashamed that they live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. And not only that, I drive around my dad and I drove around Torch Lake, and there's so many nice houses now. And meanwhile, the Elk Rapids school system, they're losing people. They're losing students left and right. And it's not just Elk Rapids, but all of northern Michigan. And part of the reason why is because it's like, all the factories in Elk Rapids closed in the 80s. And my mom even lost her job. Super Tool was another factory that closed. Super Tool, by the way, was actually owned by Gulf and Western, which, of course, used to own Paramount Pictures. And then what happened was, in Elk Rapids' case, they hired Joe Yucas, the movie theater owner. He became the town village president, and what he did was he got the village to redo the town harbor. And what happened in the long run was it changed Elk Rapids from, just another working class town into a town where there's a lot of wealthy people. And, and of course, even one of those people, of course, is Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. So there are some bucks in Elk Rapids. But here's the thing. Elk Rapids has done a lot for tourism, but for the year-round residents, it's a different story. And not only that, I actually have a family friend who lives in that area, over by Acme and Williamsburg. So the story is a lot of so she tells me all the time that she's being pressured to sell her house because a lot of land in the area is being sold to developers. And one of the groups are the Saudi Arabians, because they want to build a horse ranch. They want to build horse ranches there, to raise their Arabians. And because of the excessive wealth people, they are squeezing out the middle class people and people who work in bars and restaurants and whatever. Yeah. That's what's going on. They are the ones getting squeezed out. And and now, because of this, it's like now the average citizen is buying their first house at 40 years old. I was 40 years old when I bought my first house. My dad actually helped me buy it. And a lot of the problem too is that women are very reluctant these days to want to start a family too. And it's because everything is too expensive. Everything in life has gotten beyond expensive, and the people getting the pinch, you and me, folks. And I was kind of hoping long ago to start a family, but it ain't gonna happen. I'm 45 years old now, and I'm sure as hell I'm thinking it's not gonna happen with me. I'm gonna go ahead and of course my dad will probably die in the near future, and I'll be living alone for the rest of my life. And I sure as hell don't want another man living in my house. Yeah, my dad is enough, thank you very much. Now, if it was a female, a beautiful one, well, the dialogue would definitely be changing. But the point is, I want, it's like, this is what happens, folks, when you change the dialogue. Instead of building factories, you're building data centers. You're building jobs that don't pay very well, and who loses in the end? Me and you. And and now Elk Rapids is a town that where the average citizen is now 60 years old. Young people are not flocking to go to Elk Rapids. Hell, even though Elk Rapids is the home of Short's Brewery, and they got a little pole barn there where they have events and stuff like that, and there's also, and there's a place called Ethnology that serves hard liquor. And of course, even the town movie theater, of course, Joe Lucas died many years ago. His estate sold it to this organization, Chalfont, and they've done a good job with that theater, I will admit. They even started a radio station upstairs. I'm actually wearing their shirt, 99.7 Village Radio, WEIE. Yeah, I love the reason why they created the call sign. It was because the area still has a lot of farms around them. Old McDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O. So, anyway, all I can say is, you know, it's not going to, folks, that's the way Northern Michigan has always been. It's not about what young people want. They don't want, they try hard to be hip, but it's like, but young people need jobs. Young people need affordable housing. And for a lot of people in Northern Michigan, I hate to say it, when they hear the words affordable housing, they think of black people. Oh, we can't do that. And my former boss, and I should have mentioned this earlier, her family owned another restaurant in the area, and they actually had minstrel shows in the 60s, blackface minstrel shows. And they loved that history, even though it was a hurtful history. But you see, folks, I know this is the town this is the area I had to grow up in. And I'll be honest with you, both my parents are very happy we left. All because now we have jobs here. We have, I'm happy I have a job, and my current boss has taken great care of us over the years. And I know, and it's like, if I stayed up in Northern Michigan, my opinion was that I probably would be bagging groceries at a supermarket for all I know. Because they don't care about us up north. But the point is, folks, is that this is why over in Elk Rapids, when I was a kid, Elk Rapids got to be so big, they actually had to build a second elementary school, Mill Creek in Williamsburg. Now, Mill Creek is a charter school because instead of growing, the Elk Rapids population has gone down. And that's not the way Elk Rapids wants. And it's like, and I understand, Elk Rapids is a beautiful town. I drove through downtown with my father the other day, last weekend. There were a lot of small shops, beautiful, 40 years ago, downtown was left for dead. And now you got small shops everywhere. And there's only one abandoned building in downtown Elk Rapids at this moment, and that's where the Foundry restaurant used to be. It back in 60, 70 years ago, was a mobile gas station, and then it sat vacant for years, and then it became an antique shop, and then it became a restaurant. And then the Foundry was a hamburger bar, and it only lasted 3 years. I went there once, and they served me, I waited 30 minutes, and they gave me a burger that was pink in the middle. And then when they closed, I heard that the restaurant was in arrears of a ton of money. And people were trying to sue the owner. The owner was a black guy named Andre. I forgot his last name. And I heard rumors that the guy was a royal scumbag. Yeah, he also owned another restaurant in Northern Michigan. It was actually a Dewey's barbecue pit. And that didn't last long either. But most of downtown Elk Rapids is beautiful. You got little shops that sell everything from t-shirts to antiques to, they're even getting a Glicks clothing store. Glicks is in a lot of small towns all throughout the Midwest. They're just a small scale department store. As a matter of fact, the Glicks is actually going to be in the old party store building. It was it was River Street Market previously, and when I was a kid, it was Right Way Party Store. They had the only liquor license in Elk Rapids, but then, of course, Bill Kennedy was the owner. He died. The guy was a character. It's like he had, the party store was the only place in town that had booze. They had the sole hard liquor license in town. Everywhere else, he had beer and wine. And then what happened was Bill had the rest of the store, he did sell groceries, mostly old dusty stuff, and the place was nasty. They had, even in their magazine sections, they would have like Archie comics right next to porno mags. Oh my God. And the pornos all had little blinders over them saying 18 and over. This is not a library. No peeking, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But now it's going to become a glitz. But yeah, I'm glad that Elk Rapids is a beautiful town and it attracts tourism. But you also have to have people that actually want to work there and make good money working there. And that's also the reason why Elk Rapids has lost a lot of restaurants over the years too, because they can't afford wait staff, or at least they think they can't afford it. But that's the way it is. I mean, I'll say it once, I'll say it again. If you really want a business to succeed in life, think of the employees. Because if you don't, then why be in business in the first place? You really got to be a people person to run a successful business. I mean, Barry Weiss and the Ellisons need to think about what happened to Citadel Broadcasting and so on. Because it's going that way, folks. It is going that way. I got to get going. I have a long Saturday ahead of me. So, without further ado, I must bid farewell. Good day and good luck. I'll talk to you again next time.